Hey there, Vernacular Faithful. Red Code here. And today I'm going to be doing another one of those, if I had it, what would I do with it? IP discussions. This time it's going to be Soul Calibur, which is one of my favorite fighting game IPs. So this is, my notes are going to be a little bit different than the previous one, but let's kind of jump into it. So there's two big things that I would really want to hit with regards to what it is that Soul Calibur is and where it needs to go. So the first one is we want to hit an aspect of the combat rhythm, because I mean the last installment of Soul Calibur 6, taught most of it to a T. There's like there's really only one thing that I would change, and I'll get into the actual details of that. And I think a lot of people who've played the game a lot probably have a sense of what it is that I would change. It's big, it's red, and it interrupts gameplay. If you don't know yet, you probably haven't played the game. I will say that. But the other thing is the lore. From a lore standpoint and from a narrative standpoint, just a general delivery of story and the way that it all kind of comes out. I feel like ever since Soul Calibur 2 and a little bit of 3, it's kind of had a bit of they've had a little bit of trouble, both in the idea of what the story should be, uh, how that interfaces with the actual fighting game module, like the fact that it is a fighting game, so that changes how you're supposed to do any form of storytelling. Um, but and what the people are really kind of looking for, or at the very least, maybe not even necessarily what they're looking for, but what would pleasantly surprise them. Would be the way that I'd look at it. So the first bit, we're going to look at this from the mechanical side of things first. So describing Soul Calibur as a fighting game, it's a 3D fighting game. So it's in the vein of Tekken, it's in the vein of Virtua Fighter, Dead or Alive, Bloody Roar, a few other entries. And a big thing for all of those games is that you have a little bit more defensive freedom, and your offensive combat is a little more intricate. Like generally speaking, just by the standpoint of you have 3 zones usually instead of 2 that you normally have in the 2D space. Perhaps that's a response to the fact that you're in 3 dimensions instead of 2. I'm not sure. And you generally have more prevalent defensive mechanics and more effective defensive mechanics in these games. Generally speaking, in a 2D game, you're gonna have block, and you're probably going to have a very limited defensive tool. So, like in Guilty Gear, you've got burst, and then you've got the super block, which takes meter to do, but it's useful, but it's very limited in that it doesn't make opportunities for you. It lessens your opponent's pressure on you by pushing them away gradually. And then also you have the dead angles, which are specifically interrupt the opponent during their offense, so that you can turn it around. But it costs a little bit of meters, a little hard to do. You can whiff it. There's a lot of things there that make it kind of limited. And to use a different example, third strike, you've got parry, which is probably one of the most I would say one of the most game-defining defensive mechanics that I've seen in a 2D game. It does a lot for what you can do in the game. It's basically one of the strongest balancing factors in that game, because the roster's all over the place as far as their actual functional strength. But when you have a mechanic like parry, it does a lot to level the playing field. But and to kind of round that out, with the types of games that have a defensive mechanic in the 2D space. I mean, you got the roll in King of Fighters, and that sort of deal, which just kind of lets you go through certain attacks, but again, pretty limited and kind of unsafe. Generally speaking, you learn how to play the game you learn how to play the game's combat before you learn how to play the game offensively, before you really learn how to use the defensive things properly. And even then, they can get you into a lot of trouble. When you're looking at a 3D game, the defensive mechanics are usually really important to actually deal with the kinds of offense that comes at you. To play the game at even a beginning level, you really do need to know that you can step to the side. Like it's very important that you can just punch comes, I go over here. Punch comes, I go over here. And the that kind of that idea of a defensive system that is more infused into the core functionality of the game, something that doesn't just happen every once in a while, but it's actually constantly something in your focus. So from there, we come to Soul Calibur, and probably what I would say a paragon of this, at least in the sense of having defensive mechanics that are constantly in the player's mind and are always there. Because you have the guard impact, which is a riposte to an opponent's attack, a way to make an opening on defense. You have block, which is your standard mitigate damage, and if your opponent strikes the wrong way, you get an opening. But in general, just a way to keep yourself safe. You have sidestepping, which means when your opponent attacks, you can step to the side. This can make opportunities, and this can result in either step to the side, escape, step to the side, attack, step to the side, block. There's a lot of freedom in that, in the implementation of that defensive mechanic. And of course, we also have to mention, block has high and low, and low stops lows specifically and ducks highs, and the high block stops highs and stops mids. So you already have a pretty robust system in the Soul Calibur series, and then the last implementation of Soul Calibur 6, as is standard, you're going to try and play with the formula a little bit. You're going to try and do something. So from there, we have two additions that they add in Soul Calibur 6. That they work with. So we have to step back to Soul Calibur 4, where we got the critical edge system and a form, a kind of rough form of what the meter would be. When we get to Soul Calibur 5, where they fully commit, they're like, everybody's using meter. Let's use meter. Let's just go with it. Seems like a cool idea. Let's do it. And then Soul Calibur 6, we have the meter again, but it now allows for installs, which Soul Calibur technically had a move that did that sort of thing. It just was terrible. Now they made it actually good. They made it have a use, and it also allows for the critical edge, which the super move, the standard thing that you get to do. And later on, they'd actually also allow for a special type of impact that covers all zones if you spend a bit of meter for it. So then that's the meter system added on top of it, which is kind of cool. Does a lot of fun stuff. And then we have the system that I want to change, which is specifically the reversal edge. So there's a lot of stuff that I have to kind of go over to kind of explain why I would want to change it. But in the simplest terms, what I can say is that it is a system that is limited in its application, but is at the same time very strong for what it does, and is game warping at the start, and at the end is very, very not used very much at all because of its lack of versatility. So, reversal edge, the big red thing that stops play for a moment before you get into stuff. So, the implementation of reversal edge as it exists is specifically your character takes a stance, and they are hard committed to do an attack after a certain period. While they are in the stance, no attack that hits you will actually do damage. Your character will just go twa 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 to stop the attack. Well, there is an exception. There is a type of attack that breaks through it, but any basic attack is not going to do that. So you have that, and if enough amount of time is allowed between the attacks, eventually your character gets to go. Once you attack, you initiate a rock, paper, scissors system where both characters step back. And they're like, I'm gonna attack. I'm gonna attack. You choose a button. One of those buttons beats the others. It's a little more complicated than rock, paper, scissors because it's closer to rock, paper, scissors, Spock, where you actually have a few extra options that beat other things and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's you play a game of rock, paper, scissors, one of you wins, and then we go back to the match. And so right there is one of the things that I highly dislike about it, is that it's we interrupt this match for a game of rock, paper, scissors. I don't like that concept. It's like we came here to fight. We didn't come here to play mini games. So that's one of the things with my feelings about the implementation of Reversal Edge. Now, to steelman it a little bit, because we have to talk about why they put it in there. There's a reason they put it in there. So one of the things is it is one of the best ways for you to gain meter in the game. Because when you take the stance and somebody hits you, every time you go you gain a bit of meter. Every twa is another meter, is another piece of meter. So it's a really useful thing. On defense, somebody comes at you, and you're like, "Oh, you came at me that way? Oh no 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 no." So that's one of the reasons that's there. And the other part of it is that it is at least it appears to be, a lower risk defensive option that beginners can kind of rely on at their start of play. And because you don't have to know zones, you don't have to be able to read what your opponent's doing to actually defend properly with it. Now there's an extra aspect to it, because this attack, you notice I said you take a stance and then you're just like, you're ready, but you're stuck in place. And Soul Calibur is a very, very mobile game. So, and there's an additional part to this. So you're locked in place, and so immediately, if your opponent understands your reach and you go, ha! And the person's like, I'm just gonna step back. Do your thing. I'm gonna kill you as soon as you finish that. So you have that aspect. But in addition to that, there's the fact that it's always a vertical attack, which means not only can the opponent just step back from you, but they can just kind of step over to the side. They can just pretty easily see that the attack is coming and step to the side and punish you really heavily. I mean, if they've got a critical edge, it's gonna hurt. So you have that. And I should also mention that there is a baked-in counter, which is the guard impact, I believe. Not guard impact, it's the guard break attacks. Basically, you get a bit of lightning on your strike, it goes blue, and if your opponent is blocking, their block goes, oh man, what are you doing? It gives you a lot more advantage on block, and particularly with Reversal Edge, it counts as a counter hit, so your opponent can get really rocked really hard if they see you're doing the Reversal Edge. I know you're going to do the Reversal Edge. I'm going to throw this, and I'm just going to wreck your day. So the issue that I have with this attack, with this idea, this mechanic, is that it's it's off to the side of the rest of how the game works. Because it doesn't really truly dynamically interact with the movement system. Like there's really just step to the side, we're done. And there isn't really a sense of guessing or anything there. Step to the side, step back. It's kind of a one note interaction. So that's something I don't much care for. But I understand that they wanted some new sauce. They just decided to color it red. And they also wanted to, and they wanted something to kind of help with the whole meter management aspect of the game, make it more core to the game. So, the first change I would do is I'd be like, okay, so reversal edge isn't a thing anymore. But we are going to have a mechanic that allows you to gain meter and also dynamically interacts with the rest of the defensive functionality that we have in the game. So I'm going to term it brace, and there's a reason for that. So to get into the fullness of the implementation, I'll have to go back and talk about one of the defensive mechanics that was put away in Soul Calibur 2. But before I get into that, I will basically give you the general rundown. Essentially, from block, you can go into brace. So there's a visual cue. So your character changes stance, probably glows red. Whatever element that they're going to defend with glows red. And if the opponent hits you on the zone that you were blocking, you have the ability to step forward into them, step backward away from them, or step left or step right. And that's if you choose to take an action from that. You can also, whenever the opponent actually hits you in this format, you do get some meter. Now, whether or not you're actually forced to hard commit to the forward and back, that would be something that we'd have to get into testing for. But definitely, I would want to make sure that you do have the ability to utilize the fullness of the 3D space with this, so you can go forward, back, left, right. So with that in mind, we have this, and we do that, and so you can go forward, back, left, or right, and we have to talk about why this implementation, with a lot less, there's a lot less complexity to it, why I consider this implementation to be a bit stronger in theory than the reversal edge. So the first thing is that it's meant to dynamically mesh with the rest of the options that you have in the game. So it is something that can seeg into moving left or right. It is something that can be seeged into from blocking. And theoretically, depending on balance, it's something that you could actually go block, brace, step, block. Or block, brace, step, brace. And this does different things. This makes it so that there's more of a decision-making process on the player's side, where it doesn't just say, I did it. I'm waiting. It is do the thing, and if the opponent hits during it, you get to respond and do something else. Now, additionally with that, you notice it doesn't lock you into an attack. It doesn't say, I have to attack now. And this is a thing. There are, when it comes to the defensive elements in the game, none of them force you to have to attack afterward. Guard impact, you riposte, you have the opportunity to attack, but you don't have to. In fact, that's where a lot of the mind game comes from, where you go, bah, and the opponent's like, I need to defend, and they go, oh. And you're like, and then you hit them, right? So that's a thing with that. Or dodging. You step to the side, and you're like, I wonder what they're gonna do now. And the opponent's like, I'm going to attack. And you're like, no, I just decided I wanted to block. And so that's the thing. with the defensive elements that already exist, there's an element of decision making that happens after you make the defensive commitment. Once you commit to the defense, you still have the option to say, am I going to take my turn or am I going to wait? Am I going to take my turn or am I going to kerfuffle around a little bit? Am I going to flim flam them for a little while, try and get them to come at me? Just kind of behind her. And then they, you block and you're like, Anyway, so with that in mind, with this concept, now with Brace, we insert this into the space, and this makes for a few more decisions that a person can make once somebody attacks them. And it would make it so that you don't have to hard commit to Brace before, you don't have to hard commit to Brace. It is something where during block you can go shift, I'm bracing now, but after the brace has happened, the actual action of going forward, going to the left, going to the right, going backward, again, that's something we have to do some balance checks for, but theoretically that would probably be a punishable thing, likely. Perhaps certain characters are better at it than others, where some, when they go forward, they can actually go forward and then go into a roll stance, or go forward and go to the side and do a roll. Like, I think this would be something that Taki would just absolutely love. The sprightly, fast character of the game. But this can also be used by more heavy-set, long-range characters who, once you've got like a killer bee just sticking to you, you want to get them off you somehow. And this would be a lower risk way of doing that, because Impact has that whiff issue where you go, huh, and the opponent's like, and they get you. So if you're not confident that you're going to get the read, then the next best step is to catch your breath. And so you brace, and that lets you step back, and your opponent has to make a decision of, am I going to come after them, or are they ready with another attack? And that would be entirely dependent on what attack you decided to brace. Because there's also that situation where, let's say you braced an attack in a series of attacks, and, well, the one that it's really fast, so you try to brace out, but the attack just cuts off your escape. And so that's something that you would have to kind of figure out. Now, it's really dependent on the type of attack that you're stopping, and again, this is something that you'd want to kind of balance. You'd want to try and figure out how to really make this work. But I digress. There's already, just from this idea of the implementation, a whole lot more dynamism there. There's one other wrinkle with regards to how Reversal Edge works, which is that it kind of did and kind of didn't sidestep the whole idea of throws, because I believe it just kind of, it dealt with the throw in the same way that a normal attack did. I would think that Brace in particular would either need to be if you get thrown from Brace, it's guaranteed, or it would need to be something where, you throw break in the normal way. Now, in general, I have my feelings about how throw breaks work in games. In general, I think there's probably a better way to approach it, but that's not what we're addressing at the moment. So just having the brace action not entirely invalidate the throw, because throws are already telegraphed enough. If the brace was also something that reacted to throw in the same way, that would make the throw way less useful, because you'd be like, block, brace, block, brace, block, brace. And throws are already hard enough to get in Soul Calibur as it is, which I do think that that's something that should be addressed. That's just not what I'm going to be focused on addressing today. So, all of that said, there's an intrinsic dynamism to how this interacts. We still have a guessing game going on because you can brace from high or low, and otherwise you still kind of get hit in the normal way. So it slots into the system decently well. There's an argument to be made for there being some element of meter management attached to it, but for now, that would be the first thing that I would do there. Now, because I do like kind of balancing things with, if I add one thing on one side, I want to add something on the other. And so this next part is not something that I would think would be necessarily required for if I was approaching it, but I think it's kind of a cool bit, which would be grabbing a little bit more out of that meter management space and allowing us to work with it some more. So we already have something that makes your guard impact a little bit better, but something that you can actually use on maybe any attack. It might have to be limited, but I think in the interest of freedom and in the interest of the experiment, I'd at least want to try it as something that you can use on anything. Be very expensive though. Which would be guard cancel and follow through. So guard cancel, which that's actually already a technique in the game. Just certain moves, if you start them and you're still in their startup, you can press guard and stop it. It's basically a feint where you go and then you can attack the thing. So in this case, however, this wouldn't be guard canceling during the startup frames. Rather, this would be during your recovery frames. So this would basically be, we'd be importing the Roman cancel from Guilty Gear, which essentially says, when you swing an attack, you can press this to immediately go back to neutral. So in this case, you would do this to remove the recovery frames on the end of any attack. Now, I think the hardest part of this would be making that look natural, where having the character return to stance from whatever thing they were doing without it just being but that would be a little bit tough from an implementation standpoint, but from a pure mechanical implementation standpoint, there is a coolness to that, where now you have the ability to use moves that would normally be just entirely unusable, where normally you would never use this move because it's so laggy on the swing. So now you gain the ability on certain moves that would be just terrible for you to use because you are left super open. You can now make those safe, but you've got to spend meter for it. So it's something you got to plan around. But in addition to that, we also have the idea of follow through. And so follow through is the opposite of this, where it's something that's used during the startup of the attack. In this case, whereas the other one removes recovery frames, follow through adds armor to the attack. So it's basically an attack that would be intended for attacks that have really, really, really long startup, and that your opponent would normally be incentivized to check. And so you would be able to use this to deter them from checking those attacks, but also just to get some use out of those. And because it's a the user starts it, the user makes it happen, that there's a new guessing game that's added here. So, if you can read your opponent and if you're watching their meter, I'm like, okay, so now if they try and do that big attack, they're going to armor it. So I can watch them do that. I can wait for them to not to try and do it and then put the armor on it and make them waste their meter on it, or you can be like, well, they're going to do the attack, they're going to meter it, I can still grab them out of it. That sort of thing. And so having that, again, making the grab more useful, because I think in this scenario, it would, again, be a guaranteed you get thrown. You tried to do a thing, your opponent sussed it out, you get thrown. So that would be one of the things. And, that makes throws a little bit more useful overall, where you can kind of use them reactionarily, and when you see an opponent make a particular decision. And so that would be the implementation of that. Something to make the meter management more, a little bit more in the game. A little bit more in the game. Because you do have the already mentioned abilities of being able to do a get off me thing and then go into a mode which we in the fighting game community call them installs, as a reference to Dragon Install from Guilty Gear, where Soul bad guy powers up and gets a hole, and his moves just become ridiculous. So Soul Calibur, everyone can do an install essentially. So you can do it defensively, where you push somebody off of you. It's kind of like a burst in the Guilty Gear games. Or you can do it offensively with a move, which immediately puts you in a position where you can start really throwing out all of your now hyper-infused special powers. So that would be a thing. It's just like kind of an addendum on top of that, so you have more reason to use meter, and now we actually have I think a more viable way of gaining that meter on defense. But for an extra step, because we're putting more things that use meter in there, it makes sense that you would want to have one more way to gain meter, and one that you can just do on your own. It's pretty simple, really. It would just be allowing the player to go, just stop for a moment and charge up the meter. The reason why I would add this in there is twofold. Soul Calibur is already a very defensively strong game. It's a very defensively strong game. There are situations where if a player knows their defense well enough, they're strong enough in their defense, they force the opponent to have to open them up. And the problem is that if the opponent doesn't really understand how to snake through it, generally speaking, it becomes all right, hit me. Come on. Do it. You know what's going to happen next kind of situation. So when a player decides to become passive-aggressive like this creates kind of a negative play experience. So to counter this, we give the player the ability to say, oh, you're not coming at me. Okay. I'm just going to start building up some meter. You can wait over there as long as you want, but as soon as you make a mistake, I'm going to kick your butt. So that would be the angle. This is kind of going off of a theory in the Smash Brothers games, particularly with the charge shot on Samus, the limit meter on Cloud, a few other characters, because Smash is another game that's very passive aggressive. It's a very passive aggressive. It's more passive aggressive than a lot of other games, and a big part of that is just, generally speaking, it's a lot harder to be safe in that game. So one of the ways to encourage players to come at each other is for your character to have an ability that if you leave them alone, they're going to become really dangerous. And so that's the idea. I mean, that's even the idea behind Steve, although Steve is broken for a whole bunch of other reasons in that game. But having that concept in Soul Calibur, this now makes it so that a player is disincentivized from just holding block and waiting for the opponent to do something unsafe. As it is being safe in Soul Calibur is a harder affair than other games. And so, generally speaking, if you attack somebody and they're defending and they properly defend, it's not going to be
good for you. So you have to having the ability to draw somebody out of their shell when they decide that they don't want to interact anymore. That would be the reason to have this. And this also makes it so that you have more of an ability to build up meters so that you can use it more freely on these other different functions. In addition, having the ability to follow through and guard cancel on your offensive attacks also strengthens your ability to break your opponent open, which is ultimately one of the things that you kind of have to. That's one of the things that you have to deal with when working with a game that has as many defensive elements as Soul Calibur does. So that would be the mechanical side of things. And I think I'm going to stop right there because I've been going for a very long period of time. I will talk about the lore at another time because that's a whole other can of worms, and I think that's just something else that there's a lot that you need to really consider there, because it's not just about good storytelling, it's also about it's a video game. There's a very different form of engagement that we're having here, and it's very important to understand that when you're talking about telling a story in it. Anyway, that's going to be all I have to say on that. So I've been Redcoat, member of Vernacular Games, rather founder of Vernacular Games. I mean, I consider myself a member too. And if you want to see more of our stuff or stuff that we've been working with people on, one of the things at the top of the list underneath this channel, there's the Record Biz waiting list, which is for a card game I've been working with a guy on for quite some time, and I'm really hoping we can get it out there. Right now, we're at the point where we can actually print some stuff out and start doing some play tests. So I'm actually pretty excited. But in addition to that, and the guy, Brian Garrett, awesome guy. Definitely an awesome guy in the record biz himself, actually. But I digress. So there's that. We have a number of micro games. I know I've mentioned them a number of times. At this point, you're probably like, is this just vaporware? Yeah, we have a number of micro games that are in the works right now, and that is still on the docket. The goal is to try and get something out by the end of the year. We're going to see if we can do that. And we're still working on a few comics here and there. Dropped one, but we still got one on the back burner. Currently going through some editing processes and that sort of deal. And there's a whole host of other things we've got going on, but that's kind of the gist of it. The Vernacular Games website has been slightly changed. We've updated the look of it a little bit, make it a little less garish, a little more modern. I mean, I liked the garish look, but I'm a colorful guy, so that's just me. But updated it a little bit, make it a little less hard on the eyes, and also to kind of we cut out a few things that were kind of unnecessary. So with that, it's been redesigned a little bit. My intention is to start posting some articles up there, and so it's that whole SEO thing, search engine optimization. You've got to put stuff that's related to what you're talking about, otherwise people will never find you in the search algorithm. But I'm going to see how well that works out. We'll see if it does anything. But we've had more than a few shakeups around. Not Vernacular specifically, but individual people's lives. Lots of stuff going on, and this is America. We got a lot of stuff going on, as I'm sure you're very aware and probably don't want to be reminded of. So I won't remind you any more than I just have. But that's all I've got to say for now. So this is a Redcoat signing off. Play the games you want to play, boyos.